Member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing today. I want to thank all the commissioners for their great work over the past 3 years, and I think it's a great example of public service. Your previous public service meant that none of us were surprised by the effort and the expertise that you brought to it, but I certainly want you to know that we can't express our gratitude probably loud enough and clear enough, and I hope the American people understand the sacrifice that you put into doing this job, and you had many other things you could have been doing with your time and effort, so your citizenship is greatly appreciated. Look, I authored, and so I was pleased to have Jim Leach, my Republican counterpart, co-sponsor the legislation that became the Commission on Wartime Contracting. So I take special pride in the success that you've had and the fact that you did a good job, and with the leadership of Mike Thibault and my friend Chris Shays, who just left one hat and put on the other hat and went about doing the same thing he had always been doing, which was good, thorough oversight work, and we appreciate that. And if it hadn't been for Senators Webb and McCaskill and others in the Senate who picked up the cudgel there and moved forward, it may never become legislation. So we think it's a great bicameral, bipartisan effort on that, which was important. We fashioned this after the so-called Truman Commission, and we did that on the notion that people would know that it was not going to be partisan, and the idea was not to be attacking any executive or administration in particular, but the notion that whenever we get into a contingency operation, there will be those who try to take advantage of the situation, and some circumstances in and of themselves, without any purposeful bad acts, lend themselves to mismanagement or abuse on that. And so the Commission was authorized and charged with identifying the scope of the wasteful contingency contracting and recommending reforms, and you did just that. But the results of your work are sobering. As many have already mentioned, billions of dollars wasted by agencies that had little capacity to manage the contractors or to even hold them accountable. And billions of dollars more have been dedicated to projects that were poorly conceived and are probably unsustainable by the host government. So these findings are consistent with the committee's own oversight of private security contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think we've already mentioned here that last year I led a 6-month subcommittee investigation of the $2 billion Department of Defense trucking contract in Afghanistan. Our investigation found that the trucking contract had spawned a vast protection racket in which warlords, criminals, and insurgents extorted contractors for protection payments to obtain safe passage. Our investigation further showed that senior officials within the United States military contracting chain of command had been aware of that problem, but had done little to address it. 2 weeks ago, the National Security Subcommittee had a follow-up hearing with 3 Defense Department witnesses to address those issues. I asked General Townsend, the director of the Pakistan-Afghanistan Coordination Cell of the Joint Staff, whether contractor protection payments to warlords, power brokers, and insurgents were necessary for safe passage in Afghanistan. He said they were, and in many cases they don't have a choice, in his exact words. I then asked Gary Motzik, the head of the contingency contracting at the Department of Defense, whether such payments are legal under United States law. He stated that they absolutely were not legal. So in other words, the Department of Defense designed a critical contract to which it was necessary, in their terms, for the contractors to make illegal protection payments that in many cases were used against the very forces to attack our troops. I mean, just unheard of, I think, in other situations. And so my fear is that the committee's and your investigation, the Commission's investigations, are only the tip of the iceberg. And I think your work has shown that as well. Much of the Afghan economy now centers around the United States and international military presence. Many of the Afghan elite have their own logistics contracts with the United States, and a significant portion of these funds seem to end up supporting the Dubai real estate market rather than jobs in Afghanistan. Today, the business of Afghanistan is war. How can we ever hope to extricate ourselves from that war when so many Afghans benefit from the insecurity that is used to justify our continued presence? To my mind, we've crossed a tipping point in which the size of our military footprint inadvertently fosters further instability. Every additional soldier and every additional supply convoy that we send to Afghanistan further fuels this cycle of dependence, corruption, and endless war. Simply stated, we cannot afford to fail at getting a handle on contingency contracting, waste, fraud, and abuse in Iraq and Afghanistan. Not only does it squander precious taxpayer resources, it can seriously undermine the mission and even fund those who attacked our brave men and women in uniform. In that vein, I've introduced legislation to establish a Special Inspector General for overseas contingency operations. The efforts of the Commission, along with the Special Inspector General for Iraq and the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan, have shown the critical importance of real-time oversight in our overseas operations. We need to preserve the unique capabilities of these 3 entities in a single permanent Inspector General with a flexible, deployable cadre of oversight specialists. I urge my colleagues to join me in this legislation. Finally, I'm also working to tackle many of the Commission's other legislative reform recommendations, which were excellent and on point. It's a challenging task, but with your great work, that will serve as a blueprint for our efforts that go forward. I want to thank you again for your service and your testimony here today. I look forward to our discussion, and I want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Chaffetz as well, for keeping this a nonpartisan, bipartisan effort that is all about oversight and making sure that this institution of Congress does its job with respect to any administration that might be in at any particular time. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman.